We are ready to start the third lecture. The third lecture today is on security of blockchain systems. So why are we looking at security? There are many aspects of security in the context of blockchain systems. For example, node level security, so security of individual nodes, bugs related to the contracts, dishonest behavior or self-centric behavior, design problems of the blockchain systems, both at the level of blockchain and application built on top of blockchain, vulnerabilities of the network and misconfigured network, and of course vulnerabilities at the level of the application. So there are many aspects of security and consequently many attacks. So classification of attacks. The attacks are mostly different between open and closed ledger, but some attacks apply to both. So bugs can obviously play a significant role in both ledgers. However, usually the programs running on top of closed ledgers are more developed, they're longer, and probabilistically they contain more bugs. Denial of service attacks are more, so there is a number of attacks which are more typical to the open ledgers. For example, stealing coins, that doesn't happen in closed ledgers. Denial of service attacks. In open ledgers, denials of service attack can be run from within. So a node on the open network can launch a denial of service attack. While in closed ledgers, there is usually core nodes constituting the network and running the ledger, while there are external clients. So external clients, like it's in a database, can launch an attack on the ledger in some cases. But anyway, denial of service attacks are not nearly as typical and not nearly as dangerous in closed ledgers as they are in open ledgers. In open ledgers, there is another attack, like Alice doesn't like Bob for whatever reason, so whenever there is a transaction from Bob, Alice tries to make sure that that transaction is not included in the ledger. So Alice tries to starve Bob. So that is also possible in principle. Of course, there is double spending, and but there are also a couple of additional attacks that we have not talked about much yet, and that's selfish mining and attacks on maximum extractable value. So these two would be the topic for the bulk of the lecture. In contrast, in closed lectures, we have attacks, we have misconfigurations, but we also have some very interesting attacks related to consortia. Imagine that you have a consortia of healthcare institutions. And in consortia, so there would be some hospitals, some labs, some doctors, some pharmaceutical companies. And some of those participants would be complementing each other in order to provide holistic healthcare, but some of those participants would be competing with each other. So if they compete with each other, they may try to play around. So for example, there are two competing pharmaceutical companies offering different medicines against the same, say, the same disease. In that case, and they both participate in blockchain consortium. In that case, if the blockchain is queried, so you cannot eliminate information for blockchain, but you can prioritize information. For example, you can try to order transactions related to the two competing companies in a certain order. Or you can supply information when queried. You can supply information. You can, for example, you can try to omit one block from the ledger, and hopefully it would work. So, and that block would include, say, transactions from competing companies. So you can play tricks of that kind in a consortium blockchain. and you can prioritize the responses. So double spending, selfish money, and maximum, especially selfish money and maximum attack, extractable value would be what we spend the bulk of the lecture on. But first, let's do a cursory coverage of attacks on open ledgers. So stealing coins from the ledger is hard because of digital signatures. If, however, someone accumulates a lot of coins, it becomes a prime target. And the difficulty of stealing from a custodial wallet depends on the security of the system providing the wallet, right? So it's hard, but it's highly profitable. And if stolen, there is no way to prove that the funds are yours and not of the thief. There have been many interesting legal cases in courts all around the world where funds have been successfully stolen. So one, I can tell you about one specific case where I was involved as a technical witness in court. So it was the first crypto exchange in Norway. And that crypto exchange in Norway used a white label solution, meaning a middleware solution, called the Alpha Point. So Alpha Point was a solution deployed somewhere in New York, while the organization using it were spread all over the globe. And in particular, there was one in Norway. And usually in such arrangements, the situation is such that the white label company in New York, Alpha Point, is responsible for the technical maintenance and deployment, while the clients are interacting with the local agencies, local crypto exchanges. So what happened one beautiful day, there was like the Norwegian crypto exchange discovered that some funds were stolen. So then there was an investigation. All the funds were frozen, and you could say the hell broke loose. Okay, so there are two interesting aspects. Okay, first, how did the theft occur? The theft occurred because of phishing attacks. What is phishing? The attacker knew that some person worked for administration of Alpha Point. And then they used, say, fake SIM cards to impersonate, so first of all, they collected all information they could about that administrator of Alpha Point. And then they tried to impersonate that administrator. So phishing attack, instead of sending, say, one-time code to the phone of that administrator, the attacker managed to do that all the phone calls were diverted to a different number. Essentially, after the attacker knew everything about that person, the attacker contacted the phone company and tried to impersonate that person and say, okay, it's me, but now I want to receive the calls on a different number. Or I want call forwarding. And this way, the attacker got, say, one-time passwords. With one-time passwords, the attacker was able to access the private database of Alpha Point, and from there, just steal the funds, transfer the funds outside. So that's the first interesting point, how the attack happened, because it's symptomatic of other several such cases where cryptocurrency funds were stolen. The other part was okay, how was it resolved in terms of the settlement? Well, so the Alpha Point was insured, and that there was proprietary settlement. That proprietary settlement, and then there was a proprietary settlement between crypto exchange in Norway and Alpha Point in New York, thanks to which some funds were paid to the crypto exchange in Norway. However, all this was done behind closed doors, and all of this was confidential. So the clients, the human users of the crypto exchange in Norway, didn't get even this information. All they knew is that their funds were stolen, and then the crypto exchange got some compensation, undisclosed compensation, and then the crypto exchange paid some settlement or offered a settlement amount to individual users. So individual users were very unhappy, and there was a court process for more than 3 years. Eventually went to the Supreme Court. And this is very interesting because it's representative of several such cases in Japan, Brazil, and quite a few other countries. So it's very difficult because it's very difficult to prove to prove that you are the legal owner. The means through which such conflicts can be resolved are very limited. Okay, so that was about stealing coins from the ledger. Now let's move on. Denial of service attack. How do you launch denial of service attack on Bitcoin? Well, you cannot just propose some new blocks because that would require solving POW, which would make denial of service attack very costly. But what you can do is to bombard Bitcoin with meaningless transactions. So Alice and Bob decide to launch a denial of service attack on Bitcoin. How do they do it? Alice transfers 1 Bitcoin to Bob. Bob transfers 1 Bitcoin to Alice. Okay, they would still need to pay the fees, but hopefully the fees would be small. And if they produce a lot of such transactions, they could just flood the Bitcoin network. So far it has not happened, maybe because of the fees, maybe because of other issues. Okay, the next attack, starving a specific user. As I mentioned, Alice dislikes Bob, so Alice would do everything in her power to block transactions from Bob. So if Alice is a miner, it's easy. But hopefully, each time the block would be proposed by a different miner, and hopefully some of those miners would not dislike Bob. So starving a particular user requires a significant amount of coordination, and therefore it's difficult to do. But of course, it's possible to blackmail users with high transactional fees if miners are rational, right? So the miner can even out of band contact the originator, the user, and say, well, the fee that you propose is too little. I want a higher fee. So that is possible in open ledgers. Another attack I'm going to mention is called pool hopping attack. And it's, okay, I mean, the general point here is that some of the attacks could be on the mining pools. We saw in the lecture on Bitcoin that individual miners are organized in self-organizing and creating mining pools in order to make sure that their profits are more predictable for a given period of time, so to reduce the variability of profits. Okay, so how does it work? Each mining pool is governed by a pool manager, which gives block mining work to miners in the same pool. And the individual miners in the pool provide partial proof of works and full proof of works to the pool manager. And when one participant in the pool manages to find the solution, the pool manager, so it would give the solution to the pool manager, and then a new block with the solution is broadcast to the network of miners by a pool manager to get the reward, and then the manager would distribute the reward to the individual miners in the pool. So, usually the distribution is proportional to the number of attempts. So the participants in the pool, they submit partial proof of work in order to show that they are indeed trying to solve the crypto puzzle. And then as a result, like if the pool manager gets the award, it would distribute the award according to the attempts to individual miners, according or proportionally to their attempts to solve the crypto puzzle. Okay, then how does the pool hopping attack work? A malicious miner in the pool analyzes the number of shares submitted by other miners in the pool to the manager for finding a new block. So we assume that a malicious miner is able to watch the network, which is possible in some of the pools, and see how many attempts have been submitted to the manager. However, those attempts are submitted not necessarily with the solution. They could be submitted as a proof that the miners do some work in order to get the shares. So if many shares have been submitted, but a new block has not been found yet, then the miner can realize, okay, now I find the block, I will get a very small share from the reward, since the reward is distributed based on the submitted shares. So then suppose the attacker, the malicious miner, is able to find the block. Why would the malicious miner want to submit the solution to that manager? Instead, it might be better, it might be more profitable for a malicious miner to jump to another pool or just to mine independently. So this is a typical attack called pool hopping. It's a typical attack on a mining pool. Okay, let's talk a bit about security of closed ledgers. As we mentioned in the second, it was the second day, the security of closed ledgers is different, the trust model is different. No denial of service attacks from within the consortium. So this is the illustration which we saw in the beginning. But the model between consortium blockchain and open blockchain is different. And the attack model in the consortium environment may include bugs, hacks, misconfiguration, priority responses. All of this is covered by Byzantine behavior. So those protocols such as Smart BFT in Fabric or PBFT, which Fabric was using in the past, the classic BFT protocols, they cover all of those attacks. So they protect against all of them. Double spending, well, we have already talked about double spending a lot, so probably no need to repeat it, right? Unless you have questions about it. So this is just double spending in Bitcoin. But the next one we have not spoken about. We have not spoken about yet. So I'll spend some time talking about selfish mining. What is selfish mining? The basic idea of selfish mining in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies is that malicious attacker, well, attacker is not malicious, it's rational. It's trying to gain, it doesn't try to break the system down. It tries to gain some profit from the system, more than what it would gain if the attacker were mining honestly. How does the attacker do it? The attacker keeps a secret chain and tries to mine in secret. And if the attacker's chain becomes long, it would start, at this point, it would start to release the blocks in order to overcome the main chain. If, however, it is losing, meaning that the main chain becomes longer than the secret chain, then it would abandon the secret chain, would reset to the global chain, main chain, and then would create another selfish chain. So it's interesting that this attack succeeds. It's interesting that this attack can be more profitable than mining honestly. So let's see. First of all, the details. How exactly it's done? So the initialization. Public chain, we just memorize public chain and create private chain. Then we always watching the difference between the in terms of the length of the private and public chain. So initially private chain length is 0, meaning all, because we just took the chains from the blocks from the public chain, right? So initially it's 0. And then we mine on the head of the private chain. Then there are two events possible. Either the selfish miner manages to find a block on top of the private chain, or the other miners are able to find a block, in which case the new block becomes part of the public chain. So let's see how these two events are handled. So it's like event-based programming, event-based algorithm with two events, and accordingly two handlers. Okay, the first handler, line 6, what happens when my pool, or I, the selfish miner, found the block? Then then I compute the delta. The delta is the difference between the length of the private chain and the length of the public chain. Then I append a new block to the private chain, and I increase the length of the private chain. I increment it by 1. And now the interesting part. So what do I do next? If the difference in the length was 0 previously, and the private brain chain, the length, is 2, so previously it was 1, but now I found the block, now it became 2, then I publish all blocks of the private chain on the public chain, and I make the length of the private chain 0. So it means, okay. So previously the delta was 0 before I found the block, so now the delta is 1. So I should be winning, right? And if I'm winning, then I just flood the network with the private chain, and the private chain overcomes the public chain. Okay, so the other handler, what happens if the others, the honest miners, have found the block? In this case, again, I calculate the delta. I append the new block to the public chain according to the longest chain rule. And then I'm looking at the delta. And if the delta is 0, so now the delta became 1, right? Depends how you know. The delta became -1. Now the public chain became longer than the private chain. In this case, I simply adopt the public chain and start mining on top of the private chain, which is created from the public chain. If delta was equal to 1, it means that previously I was overcoming the private chain was overcoming the public chain by the length of 1, but now they are of equal length after the others found the block. Okay, in this case, what do? I publish the last block of the private chain, and then I compete with the block of the public chain. So now there is branching. There are two branches of the same length, that of the public chain and that of the private chain. So it's unknown who wins. The third case, if the delta was previously 2, meaning the private was longer than the public by 2 blocks, then what I do, I publish all on the private chain. So all of the private chain. So if the private chain was 2, but now the public chain is catching up. At this point, I still, like after the new block, I still have the advantage of 1 block. Delta was 2, now the delta is 1. At this point, I release all of the private chain and overcome the public chain. Else means the delta was even bigger previously. I only published the first, and now like the 1 block was found by the public chain. What do I do as a selfish miner? I publish the first unpublished block in the private chain. So that's this is the entire algorithm. Now, how does it work, or why does it work? It works because most likely I am going to lose. Why? Because my power is not 51%. So most likely the published chain will be getting faster, will be appended faster than the private chain. The reason why it's still beneficial for the selfish miner is that in those less frequent cases when I win, I gain a lot. So, so to analyze the performance of the algorithm, the authors built a Markov chain, assuming the memoryless model, MM1. And they modeled the performance of the algorithm using 2 variables. Alpha is the fraction of the computing power that a selfish miner possesses. And gamma is the ratio of honest miners that choose to mine on the pool's block. What does it mean? This pertains to this case. So in this case, we have branching. We published the last block of the private chain. Now we have 2 branches. So the assumption is that in this case, gamma is the fraction of the honest miners that choose to mine on the pools, on the selfish chain, selfish branch, and not on the honest branch. Now, these are the states of the Markov chain, and the states are modeled by like 0, 1, 2, 3. Those are the delta, the difference of the length between the private chain and the public chain. So, for example, if I'm in state 2, then with probability alpha, I'll go to state 3. Probability alpha, the length, the advantage would increase from 2 to 3, and with probability 1 minus alpha, it would decrease to 0. Why would it decrease to 0? If we are in state 2 and the honest miner find the block, then I release all 2 blocks. I overcome the private chain, the public chain, and then I go back to state 0 because I release all the blocks. So now it's 0. If I'm in state 3, then with probability alpha I go to state 4, and with probability 1 minus alpha I go back to state 2 because I release. Okay, 1 minus alpha pertains to the case when the honest miner find a block. And if they find a block, what do I do as a selfish miner? I release just 1 block from the private chain. So now the difference becomes 2. And what's interesting is that there are 2 states for 0, right? One state one state for 0 is when the private chain and the public chain have length 0, so there is no private chain. And another case for state 0 is when the length of the private chain is 1 and the length of the public chain is 1. And that's probably the most important state, this one. This state means that the private chain had an advantage of 1. And okay, now the public chain found the block. Now the delta is 0. So what happens next from this state? From this state, we can only go to the state of, there are two cases. Either the public chain finds a block and then the selfish miner abandons the attempt, or the selfish miner finds a block. In this case, the selfish miner releases the next block and wins the race and goes to this. So in both cases, it would go to this state, but of course the gain would be different. So this is how the selfish mining attack is analyzed. Now let's take a look at the results of the selfish mining attack. This plot shows the revenue for the selfish miner for different values of alpha and gamma. And there is also the plot for honest mining. So this straight line is for the honest mining. And the straight line indicates a linear dependency between the power of the selfish miner and the gain relative revenue of the selfish miner. It's just a straight line. The more power a miner has, the more blocks it would mine, right? That's simple. The other lines are for the selfish mining, and they depend on the value. So the dependency is on alpha. This is alpha here. But we have different lines for different values of gamma. It's interesting that if gamma is equal to 1, then honest miner, selfish mining is always beneficial to honest mining. So there is no reason to do honest mining if gamma is equal to 1. Gamma equal to 1 means that, okay, it's public, honest miners found the block, and then the selfish miner releases immediately previously found block. So now we have the branching. And gamma equal to 1 means that everyone adopts the branch from the selfish miner. No one adopts the branch, previously published branch from the honest miners. Of course, this is unrealistic. This is an extreme case. In reality, it's much more common that gamma is close to 0. So what happens if gamma is close to 0? This is the curve. It's the bottommost curve for gamma equal to 0. And in this case, you can see the intersection between the straight line of the honest mining and this curve for the selfish mining. And the intersection is about like around 1/3, 0.33. So it means that below 0.33, if alpha, the power of the selfish miner, is below 0.33, then honest mining is better than selfish mining. But once we go above the power of 0.33, 1/3, then the selfish mining becomes more beneficial than the honest mining. So it means that like we don't need 51% for the attack. We can do the attack with 33%. This is the bottom net result of this analysis. And if gamma is equal to half, which is the middle curve, then selfish mining as the strategy overcomes honest mining as a strategy when alpha is 1/4, 0.25. So the closer gamma to 1, the easier it is for the selfish miner to or selfish mining is a strategy to overcome honest mining. We have another related plot. It's the minimum value of alpha to beat honest mining, right? So the dependency on gamma, so here are different values of gamma. And here's the threshold alpha, which is the minimum value of alpha to beat honest mining. So you can see that when gamma is equal to 1, already, basically there is no need for any alpha. Selfish mining is always beneficial, regardless of the power of the selfish miner. But when gamma is equal to 0, selfish miner need 1/3 of the total mining power of the network. Okay, so by the way, I spent some time on selfish mining because this is what I'm going to demonstrate in the tutorial session, which would be not today, but next day, on Monday. So on Monday, the tutorial session will be dedicated to the simulator. And one of the things the simulator can do is to show the gains due to selfish mining under a variety of conditions. All right, the next attack I'm going to consider as detail is called attacks on maximum extractable value, or MEV. So what's the basic idea? The basic idea is very simple. Due to mempools, the users can preview the transactions before, so they can know about future transactions before those transactions are included in the ledger. For example, in the mempool, there is already a transaction from Alice. Alice, I'm buying 100 Bitcoin. Wow, that's a very large number. Okay, so now I can anticipate. Most likely after this transaction, the price of Bitcoin will go up. So maybe I can exploit it. How do I exploit it? I can put my transaction just before this transaction. So I'll buy a few Bitcoins. Then Alice will buy a large number of Bitcoins. The price will go up. Now I sell the Bitcoins, I gain profit. This is a classical example of MEV attack. How do I exploit it? I can reorder, maybe I can try to reorder transactions within the block or across the blocks. I can inject new transactions at exactly the right point. And okay, so how those attacks can be launched? They can be easily launched by a miner who can just put the transactions within the block in a certain order. Or it can be launched by anyone paying a high transactional fee. If someone pays a high transactional fee, it's very likely that this transaction will go before a transaction from Alice, in all likelihood. And by the way, this type of attack on MEV can be applied to both open and permission blockchain. Well, not to Fabric, because Fabric doesn't have a currency, but some of the permissioned blockchain have their cryptocurrencies, and MEV can also be applied there. There are three types. I mean, this is just basic classification. Three types of MEV attacks. Front running, you place your transaction right before the victim transaction. You can have back running, you place your transaction right after the victim transaction. What's the point? The point is that you're the first after this transaction. Because now, like, if the transaction is known to everyone, then, well, now everyone knows the price of Bitcoin, and everyone can exploit this transaction. But you're the first. You're guaranteed the first place among those that come after. So that's back running. And sandwich means that you do both. You do some pre-transaction and post-transaction. Okay, so why is MEV so bad? What are the security implications of MEV attacks? Well, of course, poor Alice would be, okay, maybe not Alice, but like, well, Alice may be losing money as well, because now I place my transaction would also raise the price of Bitcoin. Now Alice will need to pay more. That's the basic example. So it's unfair towards Alice. But it's not the only problem. What happens is that now we have MEV searchers. MEV searcher is a node which scans incoming transactions and looks for opportunities to exploit them. Okay, so now we have a lot of competition, not between the miners, but between MEV searchers. And that competition drives a lot of things up. So, for example, it increases transaction fees. As I mentioned, the most common technique to guarantee that the front running is to give a high fee to the miner. And we have a lot of MEV searchers competing with each other. So each of them wants to be the first. That drives the fees up. Also, suddenly we have a lot of transactions. Suddenly there is one transaction from Alice, and now there is 100 MEV searchers, and each one issues a transaction. Suddenly we have 100 transactions at the same time. The result is network congestion. Not only this, it has been shown that MEV can also destabilize consensus algorithm. So what's the reason why everyone adopts the longest chain in Bitcoin? Why does no one want to violate the longest chain rule? The reason is that it's beneficial to stick to it here, to the longest chain rule. If I mine on top of some other block, then most likely I'll be mining in the losing branch. So what's the point? So it's all about incentives. It's beneficial for me to mine on top of the longest, because most likely this is what the others would also adopt. However, now assume that the fees for MEV become higher than the block mining reward, which incidentally has been shown to be the case for some specific cryptocurrencies, for some specific transactions, for some specific cases. So it's not far-fetched, it's not unrealistic. The fees, normally the fees are much lower than the block creation reward. But in case of MEV, because of financial incentive, suddenly the fees can become very high and can compete with the block creation reward. If that happens, then high fee blocks shift the incentives away from the longest, heaviest chain. Because now, suddenly the miner or sort of the individual miners may adopt not the longest block, but the block that gives the highest fees to them. And if it turns out that for many is the case, then there might be a split. Someone would go with the longest chain, but sufficient number of miners will go along with the block that gives them the best fees. Or maybe not necessarily the best fees, but the best, say, the best increase, like put their transaction in. They managed to put their transaction in as part of front running, and that gave them such a big advantage that it totally overcomes the advantage of block rework. So it has been shown that it may destabilize consensus this way. And there is also a risk of centralization. So why is there a risk of centralization? Because it has been shown that you need sufficient resources to be a successful MEV searcher. You need to quickly search for opportunities, maybe use even AI to this end, and then you need to pay high fees. So you need to have a lot of funds to launch a MEV attack. So not every simple user is able to do that. Only a few stronger users are able to do that, and as a result, we may end up with a centralization in the network. Okay, so how do we protect against MEV attack? So there are three classes of countermeasures: MEV auction platforms, time-based order fairness, and context-agnostic ordering. The first one is probably the most interesting one. So the second and the third one, they are trying to prevent MEV. The first one says, no, MEV is fine. We cannot prevent MEV. So the best we can do is to make MEV legal, but also very transparent. So we'll know when MEV is going on. So the first idea is to create explicit MEV auction platforms in which MEV searchers would be competing with each other, placing bids, and the miners would be accepting those bids. So a miner who found the block would be accepting bids from individual MEV searchers. And the whole process would be transparent for everyone to see. And the process would also be more efficient. So there would be no like hidden jumps in network traffic and congestion. So instead of trying to prevent it, we are trying to regulate it. That's probably the right word. And as a matter of fact, interestingly, this is the most common approach taken by cryptocurrencies. So while there have been more methods proposed on prevention, it turns out that those methods are expensive and maybe not always practical. And this is why regulation is actually a more popular approach than prevention. Okay, so what are the two methods on prevention? The first one is time-based order fairness. So we try to derive the order of transactions. So we try to make it not arbitrary, but to make it derived. So for example, by using some verifiable computation, again, cryptographic primitives, we can derive a verifiable order of transactions based on the history. So now there is no, or at least there is very limited possibility to affect the order and introduce MEV. So that's based on state machine replication, because every miner would compute the same order in the same way. Yet another method for preventing MEV is what's called content-agnostic ordering. So the ordering operates on metadata. The transactions are not released. The transactions are encrypted. But so the ordering is performed on the commitments not on plain text transactions, but instead of encrypted transactions or on transaction IDs, which is metadata of transactions. And once the ordering has been established and publicized, at this point the transactions would be themselves will be disclosed. The content of the transaction would only be disclosed to the entire world. I mean, obviously not to the participants, but to the entire world, only after the order has been established. So that's the idea behind content agnostic ordering. And this is still a very hot field, with so many papers, but also so many ideas introduced in the systems. So content agnostic ordering is considered more efficient than time-based order, but on the other hand, time-based order is more like provides a higher degree of security.